Hello, good to be back with you all one more time. I'm Jay Gideon Winfrey, licensed therapist, and welcome to another episode of Sound Mind. We want to thank you so much for the support that you've given, not just to Sound Mind, but also to Hope TV and all of the great programming that we have here. And I truly, truly, truly thank you on the behalf of our pastor, E. Dewey Smith, our production team, and so many people behind the scenes that come together for this to be a work of art, and then also a blessing to you all. So thank you so much for your support. So I want to dive right in today and start with our episode 3 of season 6. But before I do that, I want to make certain that you had an opportunity to go back and see the other episodes that we've done thus far. With this being episode 3, our first episode was on forgiveness. And that was a very, very popular episode and a very powerful one. So I really want to encourage you to go and watch that episode and be blessed by it. But then also the next episode we did was how to live in an understanding way, because we want to make certain that we walk peaceably with people to the best of our ability. And so with that being said, it leads into this particular episode, which is one that oftentimes I see in my practice. And a lot of times in my practice, what tends to happen is people like to come to process feelings of hurt and feelings of betrayal, feelings of abandonment, just a lot of feelings regarding how they believe that they were dealt with and how they were handled by individuals that they love. And through processing with my patient population, what I've come to recognize is that there was a formula there that I saw tend to happen repeatedly, which had me in a dynamic where I could figure out what is it exactly that tends to happen that leads people to this particular state, and what is that state? What I found with my patient population was that oftentimes it's really what I call the flavor of emotional affliction, okay? The flavor of emotional affliction. And that's gonna be what we talk about on this particular episode. Now, this is a lot of content to cover, and I wanna make certain that you get it. So we're gonna divide this up into 2 episodes because I really wanna make certain that you get what it is that I really believe is gonna be a blessing to you. And then also what I give my population who come to see me for individual therapy, okay? So with the flavor of emotional affliction, if you know anything about how I tend to wanna lead into our episodes, what I like to do is always make certain we have what's called the operational definition, okay? And what an operational definition is basically saying, whenever we talk about a particular concept, I want to make sure that we can agree on the definition so that we don't have any misinterpretations, okay? So what I did was I went and did some research on the words flavor, emotional, and affliction. And I want to give you the contents here so you know how to gather yourself and how we can walk through this journey through the flavor of emotional affliction. When I looked at flavor, I was kind of caught in the middle between the verb and the noun usage. So what I did was I just blended it, okay? So when we talk about flavor, what we're talking about is the altering or enhancing of the quality of our emotions, psychology, by adding particular insight and occurrences, okay? So when we talk about flavor, again, what we're talking about is the altering or enhancing of the quality of our emotions or psychology by adding particular insights or occurrences, okay? So when we talk about emotional, that definition, very simple, intensified feelings. A lot of times when people use the term emotional, when they say, well, you're being emotional, or he's emotional, or she's emotional, basically what emotional is nothing more than intensified feelings. They're regular feelings that we have, but they're intensified because of something that has occurred, okay? So that's our definition for emotional. Now, affliction, very plainly put, is pain or suffering, okay? Pain or suffering, okay? So I want to highlight those particular 3 definitions because that's going to be what guides us into the flavor of emotional affliction, okay? So what I want to do is kind of let the cat out of the bag a little early when it comes to the flavor of emotional affliction, because the flavor of emotional affliction is bitterness. And what I found in my practice is that often through processing, through different clinical modalities and different theories, what I found is that oftentimes people are bitter and don't even know it. So after reviewing some of the different patients that I've worked with, what I saw was there was a pattern. There was a progressive model that tended to lend people towards being in a place of bitterness. But more interestingly enough, is when I looked at the model, I found out that bitterness was actually one of the stages. So it's 4 different ingredients. We'll call them ingredients since we're talking about the flavor of emotional affliction. So we're going to call them the 4 ingredients to emotional affliction, okay? So I'm going to give you those 4 because, as I said earlier, we're going to divide this up into 2 episodes because I don't want to rush it, okay? I want to take my time with it and make sure that you get what it is that's going to be a blessing to you and your mental health, your emotional well-being, and just your peace of mind, because bitterness, that's a very, very slippery slope for people to have from an emotional regard and the way that it impacts their lives and impacts their relationships. So I really want to take my time with it. So we'll probably hit the first 2 ingredients today. And then in our next episode, we'll finish out with the last 2 and then some solutions as well. So I just want to let you know where we're going so you can stay with me, okay?
You all know him, my boy, Will Smith.
His tone is a very conversational tone, and he has the ability to be a storyteller because he is a, actor. And so this book was more of a page turner.
I really enjoyed hearing and listening to him narrate the book. Also, I think it was a really great book because he was just so open and honest. And I mean, I don't think he really left anything out. I mean, he talked about everything in the book.
And I just want to throw this out there, that this is basically one of my favorite memoirs. And you know how I feel about the other book that I have read.
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made her college years happen. Opening that education savings account when she was little. Spearheading a campus tour. And another, and another, and another, and another. Bam! Deciphering financial aid. She was like, what? But now she's like, you aced planning for college. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
When will someone know that they need a coach?
If you're looking at your life and you're taking an evaluation of yourself and you're not happy with where you are and you can't seem to come up with what you need to do to become happy, then, a life coach may be that individual that you need. Now, if you're just having a rut, just, a week at a time and you can kind of talk yourself out of it or you get over that, you may not necessarily need a life coach. But when you are really stuck and you've tried this and you tried that and it's not working for you and you just feel like you need more, then I definitely believe that a life coach would be someone that you can reach out to.
Let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first ingredient, okay, ingredient 1 of the flavor of emotional affliction. The first ingredient is adverse feelings or experiences, okay? Now keep in mind, this is a progressive model. So what you're gonna see is, as I add an ingredient, as we go from ingredient 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, what you're going to see is this is how bitterness manifests itself, okay? This is the flavor of emotional affliction. So the first ingredient or the first stage is adverse feelings or experiences, okay? So the definition of adverse feelings or experiences is as follows. Is our feelings about the negative things that happen to us repeatedly. Again, adverse feelings and experiences are our feelings about the negative things that happen to us repeatedly. Now, the key word in that definition is repeatedly, because the truth of the matter is adverse things happen to us often. happens to us every day, a couple times a day, many times a day. It's just oftentimes a matter of the perspective that we have. So in this case, when we're talking about adverse feelings, about negative experiences that happen to us repeatedly, this is the first ingredient that leads itself to emotional affliction and ultimately bitterness, because as things happen to us and it happens to us repeatedly, it has an adverse or negative impact. Okay, and this is often the birthplace of negativity, the birthplace of bitterness comes from adverse situations and experiences that happen repeatedly. So I really want you to home in on that, is that it's repeated things that happen, okay? If you find yourself in relationships that are always turn out the same way, that's a repeated dynamic if it's negative. If you find yourself always giving to people and then when you need something in return, no one's there for you, that's a repeated adverse experience. If you find yourself at a job and you like the job and then you find out that they're doing cuts and all of a sudden you're the one that's cut, and that's happened to you a couple of times, that can be an adverse experience that repeatedly happens. So the key part to ingredient 1 or stage 1 is adverse experiences that happen repeatedly, okay? So I don't want you to take it out of context and say, well, Dr. Winfrey said that if I have an adverse experience, then I need to go see a therapist. Well, you should if it's overwhelming. If there's a social or occupational impairment, by all means, please see someone to help you process through it. But what we're talking about, again, key word is repeatedly when it comes to adverse experiences that happen to us, okay? So I want to make sure that we get that, because that's ingredient 1, all right? So all minds clear on the first ingredient, or rather the first stage of the flavor of emotional affliction. Now it leads us to the second ingredient, okay? Now the second ingredient is resentment, okay? Resentment or being resentful, okay? Now, this one, because we have a progressive model that we're working with, and what I mean by progressive model is once we have one ingredient that isn't addressed, or one stage that isn't addressed, then it goes to the next stage. So ingredient 2, stage 2 is resentment, okay? So resentment is what happens when we don't address aggressively the adverse and negative experiences and feelings that we have, okay? So that's always an indication that we need to do the work of processing effectively, because if we don't process the adverse feelings, they will become resentment, okay? So let's touch on the resentment dynamic more closely so that we can gather ourselves and see how it progresses into the flavor of emotional affliction, okay? So with resentment, I took a different angle because I didn't really want to give a definition for resentment, because as I reflected over the patients that I've worked with in therapy, everyone had a different definition of resentment. However, they all had examples of the feelings that were tied to resentment. So I felt that it would be much more effective here at Sound Mind to not define it in terms of the actual definition as far as an objective definition, because resentment and being resentful can be completely subjective, because it's based on how a person feels. Now, one thing that I like to say in my practice often is, as a therapist, as a 26-year clinical practitioner, I always tell my patients this: no one has a right to tell you how to feel. That's your right. Because what you feel is just that, it's yours. It's a singular possessive pronoun, it's your feelings. So in that being said, being resentful and having resentment can look completely different. But what I saw was there were some commonalities that I saw that people had verbalized over the course of my years of working with individuals who had emotional affliction, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna touch on each one of these, and I want you to be honest and transparent with yourself. Same thing I would tell you if you were sitting down with me in my practice. I want you to be honest with yourself and see if any of these feelings that you're gonna hear me say can be ascribed to how you have felt about any given situation. So I want you, first and foremost, let's go back to the adverse feelings and negative experiences. Let's go back to ingredient 1. I want you to think of an adverse or negative experience that has happened to you repeatedly. I want you to take a couple of seconds just to think about that. Because this is the part of the transparency that makes therapy so impactful. I often tell my patient population, I'm only as effective as your truth. Treatment is only as effective as your truth. So therapy, we really got to go there. We really got to go there and be honest and transparent with our feelings and our sentiments so that we can walk through that in order to get the value of it and be free from whatever that adverse dynamic is. So I want you to take a couple seconds just to think about any adverse or negative situation that has repeatedly happened. Just take about 5 to 7 seconds to do that.
What's up, everybody? This is Jason Claiborne, and you're tuned in to Tea and Worship with my sister Mignon and my brother Chris and Corey on Hope TV.
Father God, who is Chris?
Did I make up a name?
You said 3 hoes. You said 3 people.
Chris, what is it, Chris? Chris. Let's do it again. Oh my God. What's up, everybody? This is Jason Claiborne, and you're watching Tea and Worship with Mignon and Corey on the Hope TV. All right, I don't know where Chris came from. Bless all the Christians in the world right now.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
We are picking men's brains today because we're asking men questions that we want to know. Honest answers. Don't get mad at the messengers.
You're changing your looks all the time because you have to keep changing to keep his attention and to keep him from doing it. Then guess what? It's not you, it's the guy.
Okay, so now that you got that imagery in your mind, now let's go back to ingredient number 2, resentment or being resentful. And I'm going to go over some feelings here and just be honest with yourself and say if it pertains to you or not. So here's some of the unaddressed adverse feelings that come up with resentment. Hard feelings, envy, discontent, grievance, malice, ill will, hostility, displeasure, discontent, irritation, animosity, and hate. Now, those are some very, very strong adverse feelings. And if we're being honest and transparent with ourselves, I think strong and adverse is probably giving it a very light connotation, because these are some very intense feelings that I've seen individuals bring to my practice. And so I want to recircle around those because I want to help you get an idea of what that may look like for you. So when we talk about hard feelings are feelings that we have towards individuals that just make us almost numb to anything that may go on with them. When you look at them, you don't really feel the warmth that you would feel for a stranger. It's a lot of tension that's there, okay? That's what a hard feeling is in terms of what I would define it as a clinical practitioner. Envy, we all know what envy is, but for the sake of clarity, envy is basically when we look at what somebody else has and we compare it to ourselves in terms of what we don't have, okay? That's what envy would be. Discontent is when you have an utter disregard for anything having to do with that person. If you hear their name, you become dismissive. If you hear something that they've done, you minimize it. That's what discontent would be. Grievance is when you look at an individual and you complain about everything they do. How they walk irritates you, how they talk irritates you. If they park at a certain place, you have an issue with that. It's just, you literally just have a strong disregard for any and everything they do to the point that you complain about it. That's what a grievance would be from a clinical regard. Malice. Now, malice is when we would look at an individual and we would plot and plan to actually hurt them. Now, when I say plot and plan, I'm not hoping that any of us will go out and do any harm, but a lot of times what I've seen clinically is not going out and do harm physically, is more so very passive-aggressive things that people would tend to do. Like somebody at work may notate when you were late, or they may bring up something that you did in a meeting to try to publicly embarrass you. Or someone that, say, I've seen this in my practice, say someone that you may have dated, somebody who may have dated you years ago, and you find somebody that you're happy with, and all of a sudden, they try to find out who that person is. They inbox that person with stuff that happened between you all 5, 10 years ago. That's malice, when it's something that's planned with the intention on being hurtful. Ill will. Ill will is literally just what it sounds like. It's when you wish ill on them. You don't want anything good to happen to them. You want anything positive in their life. You just have an ill will towards them, and you'll do whatever to try to contribute to that being done. Hostility. Hostility is an aggressive form of disdain for a person. When a person is operating in hostility, their tone is very aggressive. Their interaction is aggressive. Sometimes that can come across as being bossy, as being controlling, as being condescending. That's typically what you see in hostility in that regard. Just a very aggressive approach with no type of balance, or for what I like to say, a lack of humanity, if we're being honest and transparent. Displeasure. Again, anything that they do you just don't like. It doesn't matter. It could be a perfect idea. It could be a great thing that's happening that they're a part of. You just have a displeasure, a general dislike for all things related to this person. Discontent. Anything that person does makes you unhappy, okay? And it shows on your face, it shows in your words, it shows in your actions. That's what discontent will look like from a clinical regard. Irritation. I think we all know what irritation looks like and what it feels like. Irritation is basically when there is an uneasiness about that person and the interactions that you have with them or anything associated with them, okay? And then we have animosity. Animosity and hate are kind of neighbors, if you say. Animosity is when you look at an individual and you feel as if that person has slighted you in some way. And so there is a true inherent form of just dislike for them based on the fact that you have animosity towards them. And then the last one, that very strong word, hate. Now, hate is a very, very, very strong word to use. And oftentimes when people use that in my practice, I always like to recycle them back to that word and challenge them in that, because to say hate is such a level of just utter inhuman feeling that I want to make certain that that word is used cautiously and knowingly. And oftentimes when I challenge a patient in therapy on the word hate, they'll use another word, because what they understand is that the word hate has such a heaviness to it that it often drags you down as a person, as an individual. But nonetheless, all these are words that describe the adverse feelings that can lead to being resentful or having resentment, okay? So now that we got the examples of resentment out the way, let's have a therapeutic conversation about how and why does resentment come about? How or why does resentment even form in the first place? Now remember, this is a progressive model, okay? So remember, our first ingredient was adverse feelings or negative experiences that happen repeatedly. That's the first ingredient, okay? So you can't get resentment unless you've had repeated adverse experience and feelings, okay? So we want to look at where does resentment come from? Why is it formed? And we got 5 areas here. 5 areas that play a major role in how resentment and being resentful forms and how it comes about. The first reason why resentment forms and comes about is because of criticism, okay? Now, think of times in your professional realm when you've been criticized over and over again. That's the key word, repeatedly. When you are criticized over and over and over again, it is going to lead to some feelings of resentment because you feel attacked. It'll make you feel inadequate. It'll make you question yourself, question your self-esteem because you're constantly being criticized. There's a high level of criticism, okay? So on top of that, after that, we also have, for number 2, not having our thinking and actions respected. Nothing makes a person feel more resentful than when they feel as if their thinking and actions are not respected, okay? Think about relationships that you've had with individuals where the thinking and acting that you've done did not yield what you thought was a respectful reaction. So you felt resentful. You felt some of those negative, adverse feelings that we spoke of at the beginning of our conversation about resentment. The third reason why resentment forms is we disagree on a close and dear subject. There's nothing to make a person get more resentful than when something is near and dear to them and they're having a conversation and a person just adamantly disagrees. We do this a lot in our personal relationships, our marriages, our romantic relationships, our family relationships. If somebody disagrees with us repeatedly, it just makes us feel a certain kind of way. And over time, that leads to being resentful and resentment. Okay, number 4, holding on to hurt. Now, this is something that we have a bad habit of doing, is that we do what I call, we recycle hurt, where if we're upset, in order to justify us being in that place, we just recycle it. We think about it, we stew over it, even though the Bible tells us not to do that, not to let the sun go down on our wrath, but we end up doing that. And as a result, what ends up happening is we become resentful over time, okay? So then the last reason why resentment forms, number 5, is we refuse to forgive. When we refuse to forgive, it's going to be the breeding ground for resentment because that means that we're putting forth energy into not moving forward. So we're literally being resistant to what it is that someone may want to do to move forward. So in order to be resistant to someone asking for forgiveness, you literally have to hold on to that emotion, which means you have to reenact it over and over. And the thing that happens in this dynamic that I tell my patient population is when you're reenacting that emotion over and over again that led to you being resentful, you often end up having to put more energy into it, which kind of in turn makes you even kind of forget what originally happened. So you're reacting it, but without the authenticity of the moment of what eventually, what initially happened in that context. So those are the 4 reasons why resentment forms, okay? So we touched on resentment, we touched on the examples of resentment, we also touched on the reasons why resentment forms, but then we also addressed adverse feelings and negative experiences that happen repeatedly. So those are the first 2 ingredients for the flavor of emotional affliction. So I want you to marinate on those. I want you to really have that so that you can take it in. And what we're gonna do in our next episode is we're gonna go over ingredients 3 and 4. And we're gonna also then talk about solutions because it's not just about having conversation, it's also about having conviction that leads to conversion, okay? That's critical. It's really important for me as a practitioner and as the host of Sound Mind to not just give you the information and educate you on how our minds work and our feelings and our behaviors, but to give you solutions so you can take from this show actual action steps that you can apply and you can see the benefit of your life coming together in the way that you want to, and you can remove those barriers that are stopping you from having the quality of life that God wants us all to have, okay? So that's it for this particular episode. Thank you so very much for tuning in. As always, I enjoy just being able to be a blessing to you. Please give us feedback, email us here at Hope TV. And always, as I like to say, make certain that you support the other shows. We have some great shows here. We have Boss Up with Miss Nicole Jones. We have Tea and Worship with Minion and Corey. We have Cooking with KL. We have Hey Miss Kim. Just have a lot of great wholesome programming. So please be blessed and show the support across all of the different programming that we have here at Hope TV. And as always, in closing, as I like to say, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he turn his love and smile and countenance towards you and grant you shalom peace. I am Jay Gideon Winfrey, licensed therapist, and this has been another episode of Sound Mind. We'll see you next time for the follow-up to this particular episode. Be blessed and be safe, and we love you here at Hope TV. Take care. Bye.
You all know him, my boy, Will Smith.
His tone is a very conversational tone, and he has the ability to be a storyteller because he is a, actor. And so this book was more of a page turner.
I really enjoyed hearing and listening to him narrate the book. Also, I think it was a really great book because he was just so open and honest. And I mean, I don't think he really left anything out. I mean, he talked about everything in the book.
And I just want to throw this out there, that this is basically one of my favorite memoirs. And you know how I feel about the other book that I have read.